Hello, and welcome to Speaking of Our Words, a production of the Kenosha Writers Guild. We will be bringing you in this format a series of videos to allow you, the viewer, the opportunity to experience the oral reading of the work of local writers, a rare opportunity. Additionally, for your enjoyment and to give you insight into their creative process, we will interview the writers right here about their work. I'm Marshall Smith, your host. I'm a published poet and studied creative writing in the MFA program at the University of Iowa Writers Workshop. Today, local author Sheree Homer will read from her books and talk about her work. Sheree, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Hi, Marshall. Nice to be here.
So if you have something to read for us today right now, that would be great. Go ahead and do it.
Okay, this is from my latest book that's not actually out yet. It's coming out in October, but it's called Under the Influence of Classic Country. That'll be the title of the book, so I wanted to share a few readings from that. I interview people, real life people, musicians, that's what I do. And so one of the people that I featured was Ernest Tubb. And so I got to speak with his steel guitar player. And so I'll share a little story that he told me. One evening, Lynn Osley, who played steel guitar, and some other members of the Texas Troubadour, along with Ernest Tubb, decided to shoot a game of crap. As the night wore on, Lynn was the big winner and even had to borrow some of his winnings back in order for the game to continue. Finally, it was just he and Ernest. Lynn got tired and told him he was going to quit and retire for the night. But Ernest said, no, wait, you can't quit. I've got to win my money back. So Lynn told him, I'm not borrowing any more money to you, so we're going to have to quit. And he says, no, how about I'll give you something in exchange for the money? How about my initial ring? He says, no, I don't want your initial ring. How about my guitar? He says, no, I don't want that either. Well, then what do you want? And Lynn spoke up and said, your bus. And it's the Green Hornet bus that's now on display in Nashville. Anyway, so Lynn won the bus from Ernest for 2 weeks before Ernest could get the money back to buy it back. And the funny thing is, the day after he had won the bus, he moved all of Ernest's possessions, because he had a room in the back of the bus, his own private suite. He moved all of his clothing and whatever, or the majority of it, into his bunk. And he moved his stuff into the back, and he was sprawled out on the bed, and Ernest just walked in, and he says to him, you're supposed to knock. It's rude not to knock before entering someone's room. And, he acted like it was his, which it was at the time. And Ernest and he really got along really well, so they just kind of joked about it, but it was funny. And then another story that I learned from Mickey Gilley, I interviewed him personally. He was telling me he used to own Gilley's Bar in Pasadena, Texas, with Sherwood Cryer. They were co-owners. And at the time, Mickey was having a hard time of it. Everybody was comparing him to his cousin Jerry Lee Lewis, and he kind of had given up on getting any stardom and stopped recording and what have you. But Sherwood's girlfriend, who was the ticket taker at Gilley's, had watched Mickey on a local program that night, and she said to him, I really love the song that you did. And he says, oh really, what was that? And she says, oh, it was called She Called Me Baby. And she asked him, would you please record it? If you do, I'll put it on all 300 of my jukeboxes in the area, so you'll have a lot of publicity and people will love it. And he says, oh, I don't record anymore. Go and buy Harlan Howard's version instead. But a few months later, for whatever reason, he decided to make her happy. And he said, okay, I'm going to go into the studio and record the song. So he went into the studio, had finished that particular song, and he said to the bass player, we need a B-side. What should we put on the B-side? And the bass player says, how about Roomful of Roses? That was his suggestion. And he says, oh, that sounds good, but, or I guess Mickey suggested Roomful of Roses, but because him and his cousins, Jerry Lee and Jimmy Swaggart, had done that a lot when they were kids. So anyway, they kick it off. He writes out the charts and they kick it off, and then he says to them, like 30 seconds in, they quit. abruptly, and the band was like, "What's wrong?" And Mickey says, "Oh, I can't do this." He says, "I sound too much like my cousin Jerry Lee. I don't want to do that. I'm tired of being compared to him. I want my own name." So the bass player says, "Who cares? It doesn't matter. It's just going to be a B-side. Nobody's going to hear it." So they went ahead and did it, and he then took the single around to every major label he could think of. No major label wanted to sign him. But luckily, he went to Nashville and Playboy Records. He knew a guy that worked at Playboy. I think he was a distributor or something. And anyway, he says, "How about you sign with Playboy?" But they would love to pick up the record. So they picked it up, and it became his first #1 song. It was funny because even though Room Full of Roses was the B-side, all the disc jockeys flipped it over, and that's how it became #1. Everybody heard it, and everybody bought it that way. Another person that I interviewed was Charlie Pride, and he's one of the first Negro country singers. And at the time, it was like 1966, 1967, it was still racially charged in the South in particular. So RCA didn't want anyone to know that he was black. So they said, we're going to send out a bio with no picture. And there wasn't much info in the bio either. They didn't want to specifically say he was black. They wanted his music to speak for itself. Anyway, so then when his song came out, The Snakes Crawl at Night, it soared to the top of the charts on some of the disc jockeys. And Farron Young, a fellow country singer and a friend of Charlie's, accidentally he was speaking to one of the disc jockeys, and he accidentally said, "Oh, I'm so happy for Charlie, being he's black and he's got a #1 song." The disc jockey was taken aback and said, "What did you say? Could you repeat what you said?" And he says, "He's black, but I'm happy for him." He says, "Oh my gosh, I got to go call the station." So he gets on the phone and he calls the station. And he says, "You got to pull that record right now because he's black. We're not going to play that record anymore." And Farron overheard him, and he says to him, "You know what? If you're going to pull his record, pull all of mine too. And if you ever play any of my records again, I'll come and burn your place down." So that was
quite a story.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting to hear that. But like I said, the civil rights were still going on. And,
sure.
And it was funny when Charlie would come out on stage, nobody knew he was black, so everybody was kind of shocked. But once he opened his mouth and started singing, he has such a humble, pleasant personality that he immediately won like everybody over, and everybody just loved him and wanted to meet him and asked him how he got into the business and all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of an interesting aside. Before he got into the music business, he actually played in the Negro Baseball League. So he played against Willie Mays and Hank Aaron and a lot of the guys that,
Quite a life.
Yeah, became really famous. And the reason he got into country music is because none of the teams wanted to sign him. They didn't think he was good enough. So they told him, "You better catch a bus back home." And instead of catching a bus back home, he caught a bus to Nashville. Because he was singing while he was playing baseball, and he had made some connections, and some of the guys from Nashville had said, "Oh, you should go down there and talk to the executives." So that's what he did. He went down and met with Webb Pierce, and Webb liked him, and before you know it, he got signed. So
there you go. Well, are you finished reading for now? Or?
Yeah, that's fine.
Great, those are great stories.
Thank you much.
Yeah, those are great stories. That must be a lot of fun to interview those folks and develop what you're going to write out of that. Yeah,
definitely. It's like time travel to me because I love that time period, the 50s, early 60s. This kind of goes a little bit later than that, but I just love that time period, and to hear those stories, like I said, it's like time travel because they're so detailed and so good at telling the stories and telling about their lives. It's like you're right there.
So what do you so much like about that time period? And you're speaking in particular about country music that period, or just the general?
Just in general.
Okay.
I love everything about it. If I could have lived any time, that would have been it.
Yeah.
I love the cars. I love the music. And not just country music, but rock and roll. Elvis is my favorite singer.
Oh, okay.
So just that whole time period. The movies were great back then, the fashion, just everything about it. It was simpler times too. You know, you could meet someone easier for a date, you know, at a dance. You could go to a dance and possibly meet someone there, or go out on a picnic, or I just like the easygoing wholesomeness of the whole thing.
I see. Interesting. So you began writing when, and what got you started?
Well, I took journalism in college.
Okay.
So I went to the University of Wisconsin-Parkside, and I have a degree in English with a concentration in journalism. And so I took classes there. I wrote for their newspaper. I did an internship with their magazine. You know, just kind of delved into that sort of thing. And I liked it. I enjoyed it. I was good at it. So I figured, why not? And then I went to a festival, a Rockabilly Roots festival down in New Orleans. And I saw these people, and I thought, wow, you know, some of Elvis's musicians were there, and the guy that sang Susie Q originally, Dale Hawkins, and some other people. And I thought, wow, you know, I bet not many people, the mainstream, don't know who these people are, and I think they should get some recognition. So I decided to start a magazine. So I did a magazine for a couple years, wrote all the articles, did my own editing, had a local place here in town print it, that sort of thing. But it was hard to get subscribers, it was hard to get advertisers, and it was not cost productive. I was losing a lot. So I had all these interviews accumulated, and a friend of mine suggested, and he actually became my mentor then, he says, why don't you write a book? And this was a long time ago. This is like talking like 10 years ago at least. And anyway, he said, why don't you take those interviews and see if you can get published? And I thought, oh, I don't know anything about writing a book. But he says, well, I'll help you. So he helped me write a proposal and kind of get the whole thing together, because he had already written a couple books himself. So I sent it around, and it was about 50 different publishers before I found one that was interested or even knew how to market what I was writing about. Because my first book was all about rockabilly. So like Elvis Presley and Buddy Holly and Ricky Nelson and people like that.
And rockabilly was in New Orleans. Is that an event? Is that what you were?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
It was called the Ponderosa Stomp.
Okay.
And it was like a 3-day event, a 3-day festival. They still have it periodically. But they got all these artists together, and you paid admission, and you know, you sat in the audience and you watched these concerts. And sometimes you got to meet the artists too. Not so much down there, but usually my mom and I attend the shows, and usually we get to, you know, meet the artists afterwards. But anyway, so that kind of all transpired, and before you know it, you know, I got signed up with McFarlane. And I've been with them ever since, and this is my 4th book now.
Oh, okay.
And so.
Now your work is always nonfiction.
Correct.
And you work from your interviews with people who are in specifically the music business always?
Correct.
Or, okay.
Well, I mean, for the most part, I wrote a book on Ricky Nelson. So it was all about his life. And so what I did is I spoke to a lot of his musicians, a couple of his producers, music producers, but then I also spoke with actors that were on the show with him. So sometimes I delve, you know, a little bit deeper into, you know.
Because he went a couple different directions,
correct.
That kind of was a natural link up, I guess, to talk about his acting part as well as his music part.
Right,
yeah.
right.
Okay. Very good. So the music that you like a lot is country music, because what I read that you sent was largely what was in there, I believe.
Yeah, correct. This is just on country, but I don't really pigeonhole myself into liking just one particular genre. I love rock and roll, 50s rock and roll. I love the old pop music like Doris Day and Dean Martin.
Oh, okay. And have you interviewed some of the rock and roll musicians?
Well, actually, I spoke to, in the first book, when I featured Buddy Holly, I got to talk with the Crickets.
Oh, great.
Which was really cool. That was one of my few interviews in person. And I wasn't even, you know, really a professional then. I didn't have my magazine at that time, but I just went up to them. I'd seen them at a festival. It was actually in Green Bay at the Oneida Casino. And I said to them, you know, hello, I'm Sheree Homer, and, you know, I really love your music that you did with Buddy, and I'm such a fan, and what have you.
Was Buddy alive at this time?
No.
Oh, okay.
Because Buddy got killed in 1959, so this is like 50 years later. Well, not exactly, but quite a bit later. Anyway, so I said to him, you know, I introduced myself and how much I love the music, and I said I would love to interview you guys. And they didn't know me from Adam, you know, but
Sure.
they sat down and they said, sure, what questions have you got? And I was prepared. And so I had a bunch of questions, and they took their time with me, and they were really nice. And so that kind of, you know, helped me lead to other ones. And
Were they still performing?
correct,
Oh,
yes.
okay.
They were on the festival. That's why I got
okay.
to see them.
Oh, okay. Great. Interesting. So, Ricky Nelson, he was on what TV show?
The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet
Oh, right. Okay.
with his
okay.
family.
Right. But he sang on that show too,
Correct,
didn't he?
yes.
Yeah, I think I do vaguely recall that.
That's how he kind of got into the music business. Well, here's the kind of a backstory, and it's kind of interesting. He was out on a date with this girl, and she didn't really want to go out with him. She liked the older boys, and he was like more her age. Anyway, they were out, and I do believe they went to the movies or something. And on the way home, Elvis came on the radio, and she just went completely nuts to hear Elvis, and he got jealous. He was upset, and he said to her, kind of jokingly but kind of seriously too, I'm going to make a record. And she laughed. She thought that was the funniest thing in the world. Like, yeah, whatever, you know. But he did go. He went to his dad then, like the next day, and said, "Hey, Pop, you know, I want to make a record. Is it possible?" Because his dad was a band leader and was quite successful in the '30s.
Had connections.
Correct. So he says, "Sure, yeah, why not? We'll try it out on the show, see how it happens. You know, works out." So he sang "I'm Walking." I think it was April 4th, 1957, or April 10th, one of the two. Anyway, so he went and did that, and then they went into the recording studio and did the song, and then the girl came back later after he had some success, and she says, how come you don't call me anymore? How come we never go out? He says, "Oh, I've been really busy, you know, whatever." And I think he even gave her a copy of the record, and he said, you know, "Here, now laugh." So it's kind of an interesting backstory on that.
Yeah, that is interesting. Do you have something else you would like to read?
Sure. There's a really popular song called "You're the Reason God Made Oklahoma." It was a #1 song, and it was featured in a Clint Eastwood movie. Well, producer Snuff Garrett loved the singers of that song, David Frizzell and Shelley West, and he told them that he'd turn them into the country version of Sonny and Cher. Well, they were signed to a record deal, or all ready to do an album, had the songs chosen, and "You're the Reason God Made Oklahoma" was one of the songs. But then, for whatever reason, the label dropped the country music division. So that was the end of that album. So they had no record deal, no way to record the songs. So fortunately at the time, their producer was working with Clint Eastwood doing movie soundtracks. And he was driving Clint home one evening from Palm Springs. And he said to him, I got a song I want you to hear. And so he played "You're the Reason God Made Oklahoma." Clint raved on and on about how great the song was, and he said, I gotta have it for my next movie. You know, I gotta have it. So he put it in his next movie, Any Which Way You Can. So then the song, of course, was then released. A label picked them up. It was released, and it quickly became #1.
Well,
so it's not always what you know, it's who you know.
what movie did Clint put that song in?
Any Which Way You Can. It's on that soundtrack.
Yeah, okay.
There's actually a lot of country songs at that time that were popular, like Mickey Gilley, back to Mickey Gilley. He had a big hit, or a couple of them, I think, in Urban Cowboy, and he was actually featured in that movie because the background for that movie is Gilley's. So John Travolta and Deborah Winger are always like at Gilley's, and you can see Mickey Gilley performing. It's kind of cool.
So how do you decide who to interview and what you want to, whatever are you already conceiving of somebody you want to talk to and trying to make a connection with that person so you can do an interview and write the story afterwards?
Well, what I always try to do, thankfully, is include a lot of my favorites, my personal favorites, if I can. So if the person isn't living anymore, I try to get, a producer, a music producer, or a musician. I've interviewed maybe siblings are okay, but like spouses or
Oh.
children before, and they're not the best at telling stories simply because I think they know them simply as their husband or wife or as
Oh.
their father, not as a musician. And because they're on the road so much, it's
So much of the story's on the road.
correct.
Yeah.
They come home and they don't want to hear those stories. They want to get back to regular life. So, and then I include a lot of my friends, and in every book, I always try to include, I have anyway, include some of the younger acts that are doing the music today. They're trying to keep the music alive, because I think it's important, because once all the legends are dead, they'll be the only ones that are able to do this music and keep it alive. So I figure it's important to give them respect and recognition too. So usually it's people that I'm either a fan of or I know personally, or I do try to include a lot of people that I think are popular amongst the fans. Like I would think that they'd want to read about that particular person.
So you're thinking about your audience there.
Correct.
Right, right. So who do you envision that you would really like to interview, and you're hoping yet to get to do so?
Well, I wanted to interview Brenda Lee. I actually had her lined up, and for whatever reason, there was a scheduling conflict or something. She was supposed to be in this country book because she has done country. She's kind of done a mix of everything, a little rock and roll, a little pop, and a little bit of country. She's had success in all of them. Anyway, I did talk to her PR people, and they were supposed to let me talk to her, and then something happened. It didn't happen, so I'm still hoping.
Do you give up then, or do you call back or email back or recontact? How does that work?
I think I did contact a couple times and I wasn't hearing back, and so at some point you have to say, okay, I got to move on. Evidently it's not going to work out. I'll have to get somebody else. So sometimes that happens, that I'm not able to get in touch with the person for whatever reason.
And is this usually email or phone calls, or?
It's primarily, I would say, 95% phone calls. I would love to be able to tour the country, but I don't have the money or the means to do that, so I don't do many in-person interviews, just a handful I have done. So it's primarily over the phone. Sometimes I do email, just because it seems to be a little bit easier. Then I don't have to transcribe tapes, and that's a long process to have to go through all that, because I'm very particular about getting the quote exactly correct, and so it takes a long time.
So have some of them heard of you, or when you call, is it that you are somebody they don't know, a complete stranger?
No, I've been in the business a long time,
so they do know you.
So most of the people know who I am. And with this last book, I interviewed a lot of the bigger names, like Mickey Gilley and Charlie Pride and Richard Sturban of the Oak Ridge Boys and what have you. And so with those people, because I have credentials and experience, it kind of helped me. And they said, sure. Otherwise 10 years ago that wouldn't have happened. They wouldn't have given me the time of day. But once you get some interviews under your belt, I've interviewed hundreds of people. So at this point, and because this is the fourth book, I'm established as a professional now, and they take me seriously.
Good, that's great. That must be very pleasing to you, that you've grown to that position, that place in the business.
Definitely, I love writing. It's enjoyable, not just to hear the stories, but to know that I'm preserving history. I think that's important, because once these people are dead and gone, a lot of times, that's it. Their stories are gone too. They haven't told anybody else. And so if you're able to write about it and preserve it in a book, I feel I'm benefiting everyone that way.
So you're on your fourth book is going
Correct.
To come out. When will that be?
That'll be out in October.
In October. So have you changed a lot through those books? Grown a lot how have you changed?
I think I'm a better writer. I'll go back and, sometimes read what I have written, and I'll think, oh, geez, I wish I would have not been so wordy there, or, maybe added something else instead of saying that, or whatever. And I do notice growth and development, and even with my vocabulary, I'll use different words instead of the same word over and over again. So it's interesting to go back and read the older pieces that I have written.
So you record these interviews, is that
correct?
Okay, so then you have everything they said exactly.
Correct.
Great. Now, do you do a lot of editing, or you just kind of carry the story off as it's told? No.
No, I do a lot of editing
Okay.
because sometimes people have a dialect or their English isn't the greatest because some of these people don't, haven't had a really good education. So sometimes they'll use slang or their sentences aren't exactly complete. Or
Now, do you change their sentences then? Because
a little bit.
That's an interesting thing.
I try to stick to their vernacular as much as possible, but sometimes you have to edit a little bit just to
For
make
the
it
audience.
clearer, correct.
Okay, that's really interesting. So, and do you need their permission to do that, or do you just alter it, or how does that go?
Well, I don't know if they're really aware that I do that because I don't want to hurt their feelings, obviously.
Sure.
But like I said, I don't alter it too much, but I do have to get permission from everyone that I interview. So they have to sign a permission slip, just basically saying they're giving me permission and they're not going to get any compensation. I mean, once in a while I'll give away a book to someone that asks, because they gave me an interview, but I will never pay for an interview. I've had a few people ask me for money.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. And I'll say, no, I've never done that, and I won't do that, because I don't make that much money. The publisher makes the majority of the money. I do all the work, and they make the money. But anyway, so I tell them, I won't. I'm not able to do that. The best I could do is give you a free book. So.
Okay. And have they called you and after what you've written and talked to you about it, or thanked you, or how does that?
Oh yeah, definitely. Most people are really enthusiastic about being included because there's thousands of musicians that you could contact, but the fact that you're contacting them, usually they're really thankful and appreciative, and so they'll thank me. And sometimes the people will go back and promote the book for me, which is always nice. You get their fan base then, and so that's down the road, sometimes they'll even say, years later, oh, thank you for writing about me. I really appreciated it. And I have it in my library, or, they'll buy copies. There was one that I featured. He bought 25 copies and he sold them, so that was nice.
Great. Well, I think we've kind of reached the end of our time. I want to thank you very much for the conversation, Sheree. Let me ask you a final question. Where might we find your 3 books that are currently published?
Amazon has them for sale, and there's reviews up. My Ricky Nelson one has sold the best and has the most reviews. I think it has 58 reviews or something, mostly 5-star. And then McFarlandBooks.com also has it. And then if people want to buy from me directly, that's always nice too, because I actually make more money that way. And they get it autographed too, so.
Okay. Are they here in the Kenosha Library?
They used to be. I'm not so sure anymore because they have book sales periodically, and they kind of. I think my Ricky Nelson one is still here, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Sheree.
Thank you so much. I appreciated it.
I want to when we leave here, check and see if your books are here. I'd like to read one of them.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Again, this is Speaking of Our Words, and it is a production of the Kenosha Writers Guild. Please come to our open meeting held on the 3rd Thursday of each month at 6:30 p.m. at Carthage College. The meetings are open to anyone, and we welcome your attendance. Also, please visit our website at KenoshaWritersGuild.com or like our Facebook page, and feel free to leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Until the next video, I'm Marshall Smith. Goodbye.